Welcome to the Around the Republic podcast. I'm your host, Brian Nichols, associate editor at the Libertarian Republic. And today I'm joined with a special guest. You know him as the SooperMexican. We got him here. SooperMexican, how you doing?
Hey, dude.
Awesome. Thanks so much for joining me, man. It's funny how we're able to connect here with social media nowadays. It makes these kind of interactions that were never possible, so easy and so, I think, beneficial for us to really going forward to collaborate and trying to, work with each other instead of, fighting back and forth.
Well, that's the ideal, but of course we also see how many people just choose to fight. But, but yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
So really quick, just a really quick intro, and I kind of will let you, go further into detail. But for those of you listeners here, who maybe aren't well versed in who you are, you're well known. You've been on, a lot of conservative talking head channels. Whether it's your pieces being brought up on Fox News. I know you've had some pieces for like the Blaze, Breitbart. I've heard you on Steven Crowder's show there, Louder with Crowder. So, I mean, if you could really quick, just kind of give us an intro, what led you into your political experience you have now and where you are in 2017 in terms of how politics are going.
Yeah. I think we're all kind of in weird places because of the turn that conservatism has taken in the last 2 years. But I got into politics because of talk radio for the most part. I really enjoyed it, and that led me into social media. And social media kind of, I started having fun with that, investigating stories and looking into things, and that kind of took on a life of its own. And now, I'm kind of blogger, and I like writing up stuff and trying to influence people and try to change their minds and towards what I consider to be the proper kind of or more effective way of legislation and the best way to order ourselves as a free people as I understand it. And I kind of consider myself a classical liberal, which is, right. I think when people know what that means, they're okay with it. When people don't know what it means, they freak out because they think
you're liberal, they freak out.
Yeah. No, I'm definitely not that. I am what people considered themselves conservative to be, like 5 years ago. But
right.
Now it's kind of, who knows what it means. So,
and especially like today in the age of, let's call it what it is, Trumpism. There are people who I looked at back, in the Tea Party revolution. I looked at them as icons, and I would say, I would want my political views to mirror those individuals. And now, watching from 2016 when the entire primary started, and those really what I considered conservative firebrand individuals hopping on board the Trump train when you had great alternatives in the GOP primary like a Rand Paul or a Ted Cruz or even a Marco Rubio. Compared to what is the Trump ideology. And I know you kind of had you kind of had the flag that you planted as well, along with the likes of Glenn Beck and others saying, hey, I'm not on board with this Trump train. So what kind of led you to that point where you decide I'm not going to hop on board, I'm going to stick to my principles?
It really was two things, I would say. For one, just the fact that I really did believe in the principles. I don't know. It's just weird. It's weird to have to defend,
what you believe
yourself. Following. Yeah, it's weird to have to defend what you believe from people who say they believe the same thing. But that's kind of where I was at. And then the other thing is, it was just. I just saw so many people have to lie to support him, and I've never seen people do that before on our side. I've seen people kind of exaggerate a little or, not present both sides exactly, but I just saw people go all in and really kind of show themselves to be dishonest. And it's one thing if you had a guy, an honest, decent person who was pushing populism, even that I might reject, but him pushing it made it even easier to reject because it was an ideology that I didn't quite accept. But then it was also lots of people making excuses for very low character in very poor ways. You know what I mean? So so even when I tried to reach out to this burgeoning group in populism, my intellect just recoiled in terror every time I had to try to defend what they were doing. It was like, guys, like,
What are
you
you
know.
doing? Really?
And even now, it's surprising to me, and people say that I'm very acidic and bitter about it, but it's like, if you see somebody out on the street doing something bad to themselves, you're like, that's bad, you shouldn't be doing that. But when someone in your family does it, you really get upset. You're
Absolutely.
like you're destroying yourself. You get angry, you strike out at them, like, shake them. And that's how I feel about people in conservatism doing this to themselves, that it doesn't make sense to me. And I see them kind of undermining themselves and undermining their own message, and it's hard to deal with. So,
For sure.
but at least it's a new thing every day. So
It really is, and I mean, like, I really can empathize with what you just said there, because I mean, I have been a lifelong Republican. I'm from a Republican household. I grew up, basically Ronald Reagan was the next best thing than sliced bread, and you grew up in these set of principles. And when we got to the primaries, I'm looking at guys like, I was a big Rand Paul supporter at the onset, because I do have more libertarian views. And Rand Paul on the debate stage of, what was it, 16 people? I mean, he was pretty much the only true, small L libertarian there. And then, after Rand Paul dropped out after the Iowa caucus, I ended up and I voted for Ted Cruz, because I looked at Ted Cruz as someone who, while I might not agree with them, 100% of the time, I can agree with them 80% of the time, and I believe that he would stick to the Constitution, because he's a pretty strict constitutionalist.
right.
So I mean, for you yourself, watching, individuals out there, without naming names, these big conservative talking media heads out there that pretty much abandoned the likes of supporting someone like a Ted Cruz or a Rand Paul over Donald Trump. I mean, how hard was that for you, being a conservative and using your principles to guide where you were going to cast your vote? How hard was that for you, working with all those other individuals?
I don't know if it was I know if it was hard, it was just so intellectually shocking. I mean, it was just like, wow, what is going? It was really bewildering. It was just like, it was it was as if, I felt as if I had found people who agreed with me, and I was very comfortable with them. And then all of a sudden, the carpet was pulled from underneath me, and I'm holding these principles that people are rejecting. And I'm like, oh,
And
guys,
they were on your team.
yeah. So,
Are you a Star Wars
it was,
fan?
yeah, of
Okay,
course, yeah.
in Star Wars 3, where all of a sudden all the clone troopers start turning on the Jedi. That's all I can think of. Is like, you're running out there with your lightsaber, and all of a sudden they all just stop behind you and start firing at your back. I can empathize. I mean, that exact same thing happened to me, because all these people who were conservative people that I was like, oh yeah, we can all agree that Donald Trump's not a conservative, and all of a sudden they're like, well, yeah, he is. What are you saying?
And see, that was the thing, is they made it very simple for me, because they were dishonest about it. Had they been honest about it, I might have considered it. But
Like a Mark Levin.
Exactly. Mark Levin was pretty good about this, in that he really recoiled against it. He argued against it, and he said, well, this guy's our nominee, so we're just going to have to swallow this and move ahead. And he's been pretty honest about it. But man, I can hardly name anyone else who's like that. Yeah. Everyone else just acts like this guy is the second coming of Reagan, and he is a perfect model of character for it's just like, what?
Yeah. And I mean, like, honestly, the only real individual besides besides you and a very few others would be like Glenn Beck. I mean, Glenn was pretty anti-Trump from the beginning. He tossed his hat behind Ted Cruz early on.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and I have to say, I've made fun of him in the past, and I've really come around, because he seems kind of prophetic now that I look back. Much to I'm gonna admit, to my great shame now, I really liked Newt Gingrich back in 2012.
Yeah, so did I.
And and Glenn Beck was out there saying, no, like this guy's nuts. Like he's a progressive. He's just hiding it.
Mm-hmm.
And looking back, I'm like, wow, he was kind of right.
Mm-hmm.
So what this has done is completely humbled me about everything that I know and everything. I mean, I hold to the principles, but where you apply them and in what people you put your faith in, it's like, wow, I you
Yeah.
see, my Twitter feed is it's almost suicidal. I'm not, but my Twitter feed is, because it's just every other day. It's like, wow, there are no heroes. I believe in nothing.
And just out there for people who are looking to follow you, you can go to @SooperMexican there on Twitter, right?
Yeah, that's right. With two
Awesome.
O's, not a U. Yeah.
Two O's. So you make a good point right there on talking about how really you almost find yourself alone. I mean, we were some of the few individuals in the conservative movement who said this is wrong, and I'm thinking off the top of my head, like there's the Dana Lausches, the Ben Shapiro's, even
Right.
Steven Crowder. I mean, he didn't
Yeah.
hop on board. He's saying he's going to be the nominee. He's not Hillary. I'm
Right.
gonna hold my nose and cast my vote, but I'm still gonna hold him accountable. So
Right.
have you been able? Has that kind of helped you really identify who the quote unquote good people are in the conservative movement who aren't looking for their own means of trying to better themselves and promote themselves?
Oh yeah, I mean, look, that is very clear, and one of the very odd kind of criticisms that people make of people like me is that they say that we're doing it for the money, which is completely ridiculous and absurd.
Indeed.
Because I mean, like, look, I'll tell you very honestly that I have lost jobs and I have lost a lot of opportunity to make a lot of money because I will not, bow to the throne. And people act like I'm doing it for money. It's like, no,
No.
in fact, I'm hurting myself for the sake of the things that I believe in. So you see other people who do that, and other people, and I know this for a fact that I can't say. Some of the people that I know that go on Fox News, they have lost opportunities and they don't grouse about it. They just don't
Yep.
mention it. It's not, so in so many respects, it's like, I try to join the team because I want to be a team player, and then I look around and I'm like, holy crap, I can't do this.
Yeah, because not everybody was trying to play the same game. I mean,
Yeah.
stupid analogy for me to make, but like it's like you have a team full of soccer players, football players, and basketball players. They all trying to win a game, but they're doing it completely different ways for the wrong sport almost.
Exactly right. Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, I like it.
So,
I can dig it.
one thing I was actually curious about. So, after pretty much, Ted Cruz and the son of a mailman, John Kasich, were the last two really, beacons of hope, if you will, for the conservatives who were saying we cannot vote for Trump. After I forget, I think it was Pennsylvania when Ted dropped out, and then Kasich shortly thereafter. You know, a lot of conservatives were pretty much sitting there without a home. I know, Glenn, for all the flack he got, Glenn Beck invited all three of the top libertarian candidates for president on his show and interviewed them one by one. So he had Gary Johnson, who obviously became the nominee, John McAfee, God bless, and then Austin Peterson. And Austin is the owner of the Libertarian Republic, which the Around the Republic podcast that we're on right now is a part of. So when you pretty much found yourself without a home, did you look at the Libertarian Party as an alternative to the lesser of two evils being Trump and Hillary?
Um, you know, no, I'm gonna be honest, not really, and the reason for it is again another kind of a philosophical difference that I have with libertarianism, and I respect libertarianism. I think, and I respect a lot of libertarians. I think clearly we have a lot of things in common, but I think what libertarians do is that they overemphasize certain principles of conservatism, de-emphasize others, and I think they fall into error because of that. Now, that in and of itself doesn't keep me out of the Libertarian Party, because the people that you guys put up generally seem to have very good, for instance, if Rand Paul had gotten anywhere near the nomination, I would have been blissfully happy to support him.
Oh,
That
man.
guy is awesome. He is fantastic, and I felt really bad for him the way he was treated in the primaries, because he really wasn't given the opportunity to shine, and some of it through his own fault, but a lot of
Yep.
it was just that primary was just weird. I mean, it was
It's brutal.
bizarro.
Yeah.
But so really, the distinction between, I think, classical conservatism and libertarianism becomes one of, like, overemphasis of freedom in every respect on the part of libertarians, and I understand why they do this. I think it's in a cultural context that they see how our liberties are being eroded all the time, and they strike out, with a banner of freedom. But I think they underestimate the importance of the other principles of conservatism that have to do with established norms and principles that we have held that got us to this point. So I understand, I understand the reason why they strike out against certain things in society doing this, but I think they go too far. So and I'm sure you've seen this.
Oh, absolutely.
Some libertarians attack religion because they see it as just another example of an authoritarian figure that erodes freedom, and that definition, does fit in some respects, but not in the American model, right, where you have freedom from religion. And so that kind of makes me uneasy. I'm uneasy with the foreign policy that sometimes tends towards isolationism, and I know that libertarians, like, their hair gets stands on end when they hear anybody make that accusation. It's not isolationism, but it's definitely more isolationist than what you would say a neocon or just a typical conservative would be.
Right.
And then the third thing really is the war on drugs. I really like Krauthammer. I don't agree with him always, but he had a really good answer to somebody who was kind of objecting about on the war on drugs, and he said, look, we just have to fight it. It's one of those things where you always have to fight, and that's all there is to it. Now, that's not going to convince people who are very much against it, but I do get that sense that the objection that we haven't won in 50 years or however long is not a good objection when you're simply fighting a moral failing in the populace,
Right?
because some things you're just always going to fail, always going to fail and always going to have to fight, just like it happens in your own personal life. Like, we all have desires and we have moral failings, and you don't say, like, oh, screw it, I'm gonna I'm gonna carouse around with prostitutes because I'm always fighting this desire. Like, no, you just always fight it.
Right.
So I think those three things are why I'm reticent to wholeheartedly join with libertarians, but I definitely have an enormous respect for people who have. What I find is libertarians are generally, like, insanely intelligent. They know their own principles. They understand the Constitution, and for those things, you have to respect them.
Absolutely. And I mean, one thing too. So I say I'm a libertarian, and it's with a small L. But I do find myself almost identifying like you do as a classical liberal, almost like I guess I'll say a classical libertarian, because I don't hop on board with what we in our own libertarian circles identify as the ANCAPs, where it's essentially complete anarchy from a government level, and then devotion to capitalism, which I love capitalism, but the idea that capitalism can fight wars, or capitalism, I mean, it's all great in theory, just as people say that communism is great in theory. So
yeah.
I mean,
and again, that just sorry to interrupt, but
no, go ahead.
it just as a conservative, like, it just makes me marvel and love the miracle of the founding and the Constitution that much more, because they figured all of this stuff out, 240 years ago. Like,
Oh
it's
yeah.
incredible that they were able to understand human nature so much that to say, generally you want freedom everywhere, and capitalism is generally good for figuring these things out, but not with war, not
Right.
with defense. Now, they had a 10-year stint where they tried that actually, but
Yep. It didn't work out too well.
right. But the fact that they figured it out is a miracle and incredible and it's a shame that so few people understand the Constitution that they can't even appreciate that part of it. But
And one thing I think that's really important that you just brought up is just, with the in libertarian circles, you do have individuals who they are absolutely brilliant. I mean, they know the Constitution,
Yeah.
front to back. They know all the attached documents. They know all the philosophical ways of thinking and all these great thinkers, and they're able to quote them on a tee. But then once you get outside those libertarian circles, it doesn't. I mean, it falls on deaf ears because people don't want to hear philosophy. They want to hear practicality, and they want to be pragmatic in terms of saying, okay, that's great in your philosophical think tank, but let's actually move outside and see how we can apply it in today's world. And I think looking at what we have as the Libertarian Party, I mean, number one, we have a horrendous public relations issue. I mean,
Right.
we had our VP coming out and going after soldiers back a couple weeks ago. Yeah, and that was just absolutely asinine. We have, God love him, but Gary Johnson going through and just doing some silly, outlandish things during the campaign. I mean, the Aleppo thing I can let pass, but then when he's sticking his tongue out and trying to talk with his tongue out, and just there's all these little things that people just don't take the Libertarian Party seriously. So I guess I go to you now. Glenn Beck, for instance, he had Austin on twice because the first time through, out of going through Gary, John, and Austin, he thought that Austin would at least be the closest thing to a quote-unquote conservative that would come from the Libertarian Party than a Gary or a John. And with that, Austin is more he's pro-life, which I know a lot of conservatives like Dana Lausch and Eric Erickson and Glenn really loved.
Right.
And unfortunately, Austin didn't end up winning the nomination. But if Austin, let's say Austin had won the nomination, and it came down to Trump, Hillary, or Austin Peterson, could you find yourself, holding your breath and saying, okay, you know what? I agree with Austin more than I agree with a Donald Trump. I'll cast my vote for someone like Austin Peterson over those truly two evils.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, again, I'm not quite so extreme as to say that they were both evils. I think Trump was just a kind of incompetent and like I don't know. I mean, he's just an impetuous child, But Hillary, I think, is probably closer to evil because of her socialist tendencies. But I don't go quite so far as to because then you're getting into kind of odd alt-right territory where you like accuse them of being pedophiles and like
Pizzagate.
Everyone who disagrees with you is a pedophile.
And then Floride's obviously turned the frogs gay, and then it just
it's a rough
New World Order. Yeah, it's all that stuff.
I see. Definitely, and that was there. I mean, that was definitely part of it. I mean, I was looking around because all felt kind of orphaned by the Republican Party, and of course you look at the Libertarian. I mean, that's like the second thing you look at, I think. And I felt I definitely felt in the primaries and up until the presidency that the Libertarian Party was given a great chance to make a great leap forward, and it just wasn't able to do much with it.
No, not at all.
And it's a shame because this really was the year where someone, a group like the Libertarian Party could have done something with, but it was just so weird. I mean,
yes,
it's just beyond explanation. So I can't really fault them. I'm just saying, it appeared as if you had an opportunity here.
Oh yeah, and that's one thing that I think a lot of libertarians we sometimes we get so stuck in our own echo chambers that they're like, well, we now have ballot access for, I believe it's 48 states.
Right.
But they're taking a loss and trying to promote it as a victory, when I think one thing about the Libertarian Party is that they just need to start looking at losses as losses, and until you actually get a victory, then you're not winning. And that's one thing. It's nuts.
this is just a cycle of history and philosophy that you have an upstart group against the established, and you criticize them, but the closer you get to toppling them, the more you become like them. So you start making the same
Yep.
excuses as they do. You see it in religions, you see
Yep.
it in everything. So I mean, I have a real sympathy for the
And you know what's funny
people.
is is the exact same thing that happened to the Libertarian Party this election. I mean, Gary Johnson and Bill Weld, both two-term governors, both in blue states, but I mean they pretty much are the crown jewel of what we could consider establishment in the libertarian movement.
Oh, okay, right,
Yeah.
right,
So
right.
it was
Yeah,
just, I mean, I know, Bill Weld got so much flack there at the end, especially with his, saying that he can't stand Donald Trump to the point that, he would actually, lean towards Hillary and just trying to make excuses for Hillary.
right.
And, us libertarian folks were just sitting here like, just bashing our head off the wall thinking, like, what are
Don't
you
say
doing?
that.
Yeah, what are you doing?
Right.
So I guess one really one last question, because I know we're getting close to time here, but I was just curious. Right now I'm looking at Republicans, both conservatives, libertarians, and I think that when it comes to looking at our similarities, to use the Ronald Reagan quote, my 80% allies, not my
Yeah,
20% enemy. So
right.
how can libertarians, small libertarians, conservatives, even some moderate Republicans, how can we go forward together, trying to look at that 80% and work with that 80% to create a better, not only a better collaborative movement, but also to truly effective or have an effective means of governing that really has the principles that we believe in installed throughout, that we all kind of get our 80% fill.
Yeah,
It's
that's
a
a real
tough one.
tough one. Yeah, it's because there's basically two answers, and one is to start eroding your principles in order to feed the mass that you're trying to persuade that you're not that bad, that that you're like them. And the other is to stick to your principles and really come up with solutions that you think are going to are going to solve our problems and make the country better. But if you do that, you there's a chance that people are just going to keep rejecting what you say. I mean, so much of it really comes down to having the proper messenger, having someone who can talk about these things in a way that normal people can understand them. Because I think you understand this, is that when I hang out with my friends who are classical liberals, we all talk the same language, and libertarians have this problem: is
Yep.
you all talk the same language, but when you talk to regular people who don't, who haven't studied that much, who don't know it as well as you do, it's tough to reach out to. And I think that's what we need. I think that's what a lot of people were hoping Marco Rubio was for in the for Republicans, and for libertarians, it's kind of tough. I mean, I think a big part of it is the messenger. You have to find the proper messenger, and that's not something that you just have to try harder at. That's something that happens, that
So
happens to
if
you.
we got or either Rand Paul, Justin Amash, or Thomas Massey, would you be able to vote for a libertarian ticket?
Oh, absolutely.
All right.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's never that was never in doubt for me. And I think there's a lot of people like me that are in that position. But we saw what was happening this year, and it was just this is your perennial problem, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have like 15 to 20% of the voting populace who are like me. They're like, yeah, if you get close enough, we'll vote for you.
Yep.
But we all have to vote for you in order for you to get close enough so that we all vote for you. So
Absolutely. Yep. Absolutely.
it's a catch-22. Like, libertarians have way more support than they think they have. But it's that you're always seen as a minor party that will never get enough to actually make a difference. It keeps you from making a difference.
Absolutely.
So,
And I know one thing too is that we as a movement in the Libertarian Party, we or just libertarian movement in general, we have this terrible habit of eating our own. I mean, Justin Amash is pretty much the closest thing to a pure libertarian. I'm using that very loosely because I know the ANCAPs are screaming right now at this. But I mean, Justin Amash is a pragmatic libertarian where he understands the libertarian values, but also acknowledges that in order to get things accomplished, that would push forward his beliefs, his principles, you got to play politics sometimes. And he's been eaten alive.
Right. Yes.
So I think it's those loudest voices that we see from the movements that come out. They'll attack, someone like a Justin Amash, when I would say 85, 90% of the actual movement are like, what are you doing? He's on our side.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I think in today's climate, the angriest, loudest voices get heard over everyone else, and that's kind of the problem. Is that we're all listening to the loudest, angriest voices instead of the most rational, reasonable voices, which a lot of them are libertarian voices.
Funny how that works out that way.
Yeah, there you go.
All right, man. Well, hey, I really do appreciate you coming on and speaking with me to try to help libertarians kind of get a better grasp as to what rational, logical conservatism actually sounds like. Where we're gonna have a conversation instead of talking at each other. We're gonna actually talk with each other and get a better grasp as to what we each believe.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. I really appreciate it, and I very much appreciate the platform that you're giving here, where we can discuss reasonably and not yelling and screaming at each other. Though people like that kind of stuff. So next time, I think we should yell and scream at each other. Okay.
Maybe next time. All right, SooperMexican. Where can they go ahead and find you for all your latest content?
Yeah, anywhere on Twitter with SooperMexican, or my website, and I have a pretty decent podcast where we get drunk and curse a lot, so that's really fun.
There you go. Good stuff.
There you go. Great, thanks a lot, man.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, SooperMexican. This is Brian Nichols signing off for Around the Republic podcast. Again, I'm your host, Brian Nichols. Until next time.